If you watched the last video in this series, you know that I believe that God's existence is actually irrelevant because the belief in God benefits you, and that is ultimately what should determine your belief structures. I don't think it makes sense to believe in things because science proves it, because all too often science is inaccurate and overruled in relatively short order. So believing things because they benefit you makes the most sense to me, and that's what I encourage people to do. And if you want to know more about that concept, definitely watch the first video. But in this video, I want to talk about what type of God I would encourage people to believe in, and the type of God that I think makes the most logical sense as far as if God does exist, what would he look like? So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this particular video. And the reason this is important is because the beliefs that we hold about God often shape our behaviors. So if you wind up in a religion and you wind up committing crimes based upon the belief structure that's been handed to you, I don't think that's a good thing. So when it comes to establishing the type of God that's most beneficial to you, these are the three aspects I would start with. So the first one is that God is energy. And energy is something that we've basically determined to be exactly the same as God on a scientific level. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It doesn't have a start and it's not going to have an end. It's just always going to be there. It's the fundamental force of everything. So energy just is. There's no other thing that we understand it. It just is. And that is kind of how we describe God as well. And when we think of it in energy, it actually becomes less abstract. So God is energy. They are the exactly same thing. And that is the first aspect of this. E equals mc squared. E is everything, and then it can be divided into all these other aspects, which is just fascinating. But God is not just random general energy, because energy is a creative force. So God is conscious energy. God is the force that condenses energy into matter, that creates everything. And that is a conscious act. So if you think of humans, for example, where we're trying to write a book, you take all of these ideas that are just out in the world and you condense them down into a story or into a set of ideas that you then write out on a piece of paper. That's a hugely conscious act. That's what we're capable of doing. And as far as we can tell, it's a skill that not many creatures possess. So from my perspective, it makes sense that ultimate consciousness would be God as well. It's the ultimate focusing of the greater energy. That is the consciousness of God. Now, if you go a little bit further, this idea of consciousness and energy is constantly moving. Energy never stops. It's constantly being transformed. It's constantly moving forward. And this kind of reflects the idea of growth. Everything in life is a constant cycle. So you're moving from life to death over and over and over again in a constant circle over and over. And that, by nature, is a loving act. Now, I know it doesn't necessarily feel like that because love and death are kind of intertwined. You can't disconnect them. In a physical world, you have life and then you have death. And life is love. And the reason I say life is love is because love is inherently creative. If you love something, you allow it to grow, you encourage it to grow, and you continue the cycle and you move it faster. That's the act of love as far as I'm concerned. So when it comes to God being love, this makes a lot of sense to me because the ultimate act of creativity, of moving life forward, would have to be a loving act. So when it comes to a world where God exists and the things that happen to us here on earth, we can come at the world going, okay, God is inherently loving and therefore cares about what happens in my life. Now, as somebody who does have children, I can tell you that when you have children, you get a brand new understanding of love. It is truly an amazing thing because you have your children and you're like, wow, there is just nothing they could do to destroy this bond ever. Now, there are definitely things they can do that would disappoint me. There would be things they can do that I don't like and I don't appreciate that they did, but that's still my child, and that is always going to be my child. So this idea of love that comes with children is exactly what I would associate with God, where it's not a controlling force. It's just a desire for improvement, a desire for continued growth. And there's a part of love which is allowing somebody to make mistakes, because when you actually control people too much, they become incapable. They are unable to actually handle their own lives. So there's a certain level of letting go, of letting people struggle, of letting people suffer. And that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with when it comes to the concept of God. So understanding what love is and how love works, I think, is actually hugely important. But when it comes to why bad things happen to good people, I'm going to go into that in the next video. But bringing these ideas together, that God is energy, God is consciousness, and that God is love, the best way I can describe this in a way that's going to make sense to you is essentially God is you playing a video game. So God, let's say me, I'm God, and I decided I want to play the Sims game. So I go on my computer, which has a software preloaded. That's the universe. The software has all these rules saying this is how this universe functions. And I pull up the program and I create a new character, a sim. And then I watch that sim live its life. Now, I do have a certain level of control over that sim, and you can decide to what degree you believe God has control over our individual actions. You know, it's not entirely evident that we are truly free to make all the decisions that we can. For example, so many of our behaviors are based on just biology and the desire or the biological need or purpose to procreate. A lot of our behaviors actually stem from that. People have no idea how much their behavior actually stems from that. But this basic idea of we are the sim of God is, I think, a good one, because you can take the sim and point it back at God, and the sim's not going to understand what's going on. The sim is in a different world. They're not going to be able to look out and say, oh, that's God playing my life. Instead, they're going to be saying, this is my life, and God should be helping me out. But what we don't understand is that there's a greater perspective that we're not understanding. So that's a little bit, I suppose, about the concept in the next video. But ultimately, I think it is an excellent way of portraying this idea where you're playing Sims, and there are some people who do like to hurt their Sims for some particular reason, but I think most of us just like to play the game as it was designed, just living life through the eyes of our Sim for a while. And I think that's what God does too. We are all projections of God. We are all made of energy, and we are all going to return to energy when we die. So ultimately, our lives here on earth, while they matter in that they're constantly expanding and growing the understanding, are not actually relevant when it comes to the greater whole, the greater consciousness, because that will be forever. And this is for now. So I'll leave you there for today. Make sure to watch the next video, which is why do bad things happen to good people in a world with God?